Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of art. It's the Tenet Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson, coming to you from the 40 West Arts District in Lakewood, Colorado. And joining me from his art love shack on the road of enchantment, he's exactly how Drew Carey describes hot chocolate. He's like a big brown hug. You know him as quite possibly the most interesting man in the world, my co-host and friend, Wes Brown.
Oh my God, it's the Love Shack. Oh, geez, just made me think of the B-52s.
I'd like to forget the B-52s. I hate that song. I hate that song. It's one of those songs that's been overplayed a billion times, and when it comes on, it just makes me cringe. It's like fingernails on a chalkboard.
And I do like giving big brown hugs. That sounds weird.
Well, your last name is Brown.
It is. So,
and you are a hugger.
Big time.
Big time hugger.
That's right.
I am not a hugger, but you are a hugger, and I know how much you love a big hug. And
I do.
I make an exception for you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, the big embrace. So it's like a big brown hug. You're like hot chocolate.
That's right. Hot chocolate on a cold morning.
Man, I am so happy to see you.
I know it's been like 2 weeks since we've talked.
2 weeks since we probably have talked,
right,
other than the kinky text I sent you the other day.
That was beautiful, by the way.
But aside from that, I'm just really happy to spend some time with you this evening. We've been on a little hiatus. Life has, in my world, threw me a couple curveballs, and so we took a little bit of a break. It's been, oh boy, a little over a month since we last did an interview, so this feels a little odd, a little weird.
Yeah, but you know what? It's like a bicycle. We'll get right back on it.
That's it.
Ride this podcast.
And you know what? I'm really happy I'm not sitting in my parents' house watching the news, hour 18, because the news is always on, or Dateline.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I know murder podcasts are one of the most popular podcasts out there. I don't know what the intrigue is, but I'll swear to you, I hate Dateline. People doing terrible things to other people. And I got to admit, in the almost 2 months that I spent at my parents' house helping them out, there was a couple times where I started to get sucked into it. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? Like, why am I getting sucked into this? And, I see why it sucks people in, but at the same time, it's horrible television. It's just between the news and Dateline, it's all doom and gloom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And tonight, it's all sunshine.
It's all sunshine, butterflies and unicorns tonight, baby.
Oh, man. And rainbows.
So at my house, and my mom, as you know, lived with me prior to my dad moving in. So she was there not quite 2 years, but it's Blue Bloods, Criminal Minds, all those. And after a while, you start to think I start making sure my doors are locked at night. I don't keep anything in my car because I see people breaking into cars. And then, YouTube is full of it. Then we had Gaza and that whole deal. And yeah, it makes you start to look really poorly on humanity. And
I just don't watch that much television. And the majority of like network TV, it's all like, CSI.
Yep. That's another one.
Yeah. But
NCIS.
All these shows, NCIS, all these shows have like some kind of violent murder thing going on. So if you're under the impression that humans are not interested in violence or not violent animals, I don't know where you bury your head in the sand, but my God. Anyway.
And I want to let everybody know, you got to look forward to Todd's new murder podcast coming out in a couple weeks. So
that's Wes and Rose's podcast.
That's right. We did kind of talk about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, when Todd and I were talking about doing a podcast, the thing he did say is like two things: no murder and no just photography. So we landed on art, and I'm certainly glad we did. So
I am too. And thank you for everyone that is joining us for the first time. And thank you for all the people that are tuning back in after our little month-long vacay or whatever you want to call it. Really appreciate you supporting the podcast and continuing to listen. And we so appreciate your listenership. And if you're joining us, remember, you can always find out what we're up to via our social media on Instagram at Tenet Podcast, our Tenet Podcast Facebook page, and of course, our website, that's maintained by Wes's lovely wife, Tonette. tenantpodcast.com. All right, you ready to do this?
Let's do some sunshine and rainbows, because I feel our next guest here likes sunshine and rainbows. We're going to find out anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to talk with our next guest. I can't think of a better artist to kick this podcast back into gear with. You can check out her beautiful work at her website, AnnMorgan.art, and you can follow her on Instagram at EchoPod. Ann Morgan, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi.
So how you doing, Ann?
I'm doing okay. I have a show up right now at Next in Lakewood, and that's up until Sunday, November 12th. And there's an open house at Lakewood United Methodist Church, which is where my studio is located, on Sunday. So I'll be there. So busy.
Busy. Yeah, and I love your stuff. And boy, you paint big. I can't wait.
I do paint big.
But you said not Clifford Still big, but you paint big.
Not Clifford Still big yet, but definitely I'd like to go that big. And It's kind of funny because I am not a very big person. So it's always an interesting process trying to haul my stuff around, trying to put it up and trying to move it around the studio.
So how big do you paint? We'll just start. We'll kick into that.
The smallest I paint is 3 foot by 4 foot. I consider that kind of a sketch size. Normally, I do 4 foot by 5 foot paintings. That seems to be a pretty good size where people are still maybe interested in taking it home, but feels, large enough for me to paint. I like painting 5 foot by 6 foot. When I was in school, I painted an 8 foot by 12 foot and an 8 foot by 14 foot, and those were pretty good sizes for me.
So is it about body movement? Are you moving your whole body when you're painting? Is it that? Or just like expression, body expression with the arms? Or what does it make? What really drives you to big paintings?
I think it's a combination of things. It's more athletic to paint that large, and that's something I really enjoy. So yes, it's body movement, and I think a lot of my painting skill and enjoyment in painting is using my whole arm rather than sitting at a table and drawing or anything. I'm not much of a sketcher or anything like that, and I don't do things on a small scale normally. So it's just, I feel like I'm a better painter at scale. And it's also about taking up space. As a female, I really enjoy taking up a lot of space and forcing people to actually take notice of my work. You can't miss it.
So remember when we talked to Tiffany Mang?
Uh-huh.
And she's like these little 2-inch by 2-inch paintings that she does. Now we're talking like 6 foot to 14 foot wide. Oh my God, that's huge. I love it.
Yeah. You started painting that large when you were attending the Michigan University, right?
Michigan State University.
Yeah,
Yes.
Michigan State University. And so for I don't know if it was your senior thesis or senior show, you went big and you had a little pushback from one of your instructors. Is that right?
I did. One of my instructors told me that my work was very male because it was so large, and she wasn't interested in what I was painting, and just a lot of pushback in that regard, which I enjoyed that. She wasn't my favorite instructor. But it's interesting how that concept of going large wasn't considered feminist, at least by this particular instructor. And I was also basing my work on technology. I had started working with Photoshop, and I had started making websites. This was in the late 90s, so there wasn't really a lot to web design at the time, but it really informed my process. And I painted large, and I painted on panels, and I painted through window screen, to keep bugs out. I painted through screen with this cold wax and oil paint, and then pulled the screen off. So all my paintings had a pixel texture to reference the digital work I was working with. And tech is kind of, especially at the time, it was more of or even now, it's more of a male dominated topic. So that was another reason why she saw my work as very male. But yeah, it was an interesting show. I had two paintings in my whole senior show because that's all that would fit in the gallery, and a few other things. And I painted them specifically to fit in the gallery space that I had, rather than having an actual senior thesis, which would be a survey of the work that I had done up until that point.
So what made you think about doing the screen? How did that come about? That seems like a really kind of an odd out there kind of thing.
I was working with imagery, more narrative imagery from movies. Since I was living in mid-Michigan at the time, it seemed like I was, you know, as a student, I was living my life through movies, so that definitely influenced me. So I was looking at a screen all the time, and then plus it was when I started to do my technology work, doing web development in the computer lab. So I was looking at a screen all the time there. So I really wanted something to reference the pixels I was seeing all the time, because if you remember, screen resolution wasn't so great back then. So that square pixel was something that really intrigued me, and I wanted to reference in my painting. And painting through screen and then ripping it off gave me that exact texture I was looking for, those really boxy squares. And the wax really helped the paint retain that texture. And they still look like that. They're in my parents' basement right now, which is hilarious. But I'm surprised the wax held up. The cold wax that I used, I don't think that was super popular at the time. So it was kind of an experiment, and I'm surprised they've held up.
So you kind of push back, being pushed, you pushed back and said, here's what I'm doing. And you're doing something that was a little outside the box, and so to speak. So that's amazing.
It was difficult. I had a tiny little studio space at MSU, like we all had. So I painted on these 2-foot wide panels that were 8 foot tall, so I could shift everything out in the hall and then back in my studio. And I never really saw the pieces assembled until it was my show.
So I'm going to take you back and kind of talk about your art journey up to that point where you're having your senior show. We know from talking to artists for almost 4 years now that everyone does this art journey, this art thing differently. Talk about the seeds of your art journey. What is one of your earliest art memories?
Well, my mother gave me crayons when I was still in a high chair. And I would draw constantly. I'm an only child, so I filled my time with drawing and endless paper. I didn't like coloring books. I had this whole schedule where I would play the piano a little while and draw. And one of my first memories, kind of specific memories, was that I would give my dad all these drawings to take with him to work, which I had no idea what work was, or actually what he did at the time, but I knew there was a copy machine there because he had brought things home. And I made these requests for him to copy all of my drawings that I had, and he did. And he would leave them for me, and I would cut them out and reassemble them and send them again with what I had done to copy. And I would do that until there was really nothing recognizable. So it was just these blobs, and then I would color the blobs. And that was my whole process. I would do that over and over and over again. So it was a relationship I had with my dad. It was just something we did, but it was also, my first art journey.
And your first incorporation of some kind of technology, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. From the start, I had been using technology in my process.
I think that's amazing that at a young age, I mean, this was all your idea, right? It wasn't like your dad came home and said, hey, we got this copying machine at work, so if you want anything copied, I can do it for you. You had this idea that you wanted to get copies made and then cut them apart and reassemble them?
I think he took something of mine and made copies just for me to color. It was maybe his idea first, I think. And once I saw it, I had my own ideas that I wanted him to do. So
it's amazing.
Yeah, that spark. I love that. So it sounds like your parents were very encouraging as far as your art was concerned.
They were. It filled my time. They weren't entirely thrilled. I signed myself up for a college class when I was in 6th grade. It was a summer college class. Then they had to drive me there. It was a watercolor class. And there's a couple other things where I would sign myself up for various things, and then they would end up driving me. But they played. It was okay. And they were maybe not they weren't super thrilled. I wanted to go to MSU for art until I got a scholarship, and they're like, wow, that's a great idea.
Money talks.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to this watercolor class, you were like in the 6th grade or something like that, and you got some kind of your mom or you were on some kind of mailing list, and you took the initiative and said, "Hey, I'm going to check this out."
Yeah, we were on a mailing list for high school students, and it was reach out for college credit. And I saw it and I really wanted to go, and I was 12. So it was in the days where you called to sign up, and I called and signed myself up pretending I was my mother, and then just told them I needed a check and a ride.
Amazing.
What other art experiences did you have in your youth in addition to calling up and pretending you're your mom to get into a college class?
We had a family friend who was an artist. My mother worked for a doctor, and the doctor's daughter was an artist who was also an art teacher in our district. She was my mentor. She was one of my favorite people growing up. I loved being at her house. She lived on the St. Clair River, and I spent lots of time there. And eventually she taught me how to oil paint. So I started oil painting when I was 13. It was 12 or 13. It was around the same time. And she taught me how to build canvases because she was older and wanted me to build her canvases, which I did. It was my first job. In exchange for that and a few other things, she taught me how to paint. And that really informed my worldview. I grew up in a small town. I didn't really have an idea of what an artist was or what they would do, maybe outside of teaching at school. But she had been to New York. She had gone to the Institute of Arts in Chicago for her degree, and she had traveled in Europe and lots of different things. So she gave me just an idea of what that might look like as an adult, being an artist or having art involved in my life in the way that I thought maybe it could be. And she took me to the Detroit Institute of Arts, which is a great museum, and just showed me a lot about art history and told me a lot of things that I just never would have learned in school.
So really gave you a great foundation.
She really did. She took time with me, like most adults don't really take with children, especially. I had an interest in art. I won contests at school, and that was the thing I did. It was always my thing. I was always drawing. I was always making something, or doing a craft, or just filling my time that way growing up. And she took an interest in me and my interest, and really helped form my opinion of what I could do.
You talked about winning this award. Was that something that happened quite often in your youth? Were you getting recognized for your painting and the art that you were doing at the time?
I did. My dad was really, competitive isn't the right word, but maybe competitive. He was always on the lookout for art contests in the paper, and would give me this outline of what I needed to do. And then we'd sort of plan what I was going to do for whatever contest it was that he found. And then he would drive my entry to wherever it went, and I would win a lot. I won some money for a Christmas card contest when I was in 6th grade. I won 2 trips to Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp, which is in Michigan. So that was a week-long camp experience in their art barn. It's mostly a music camp, but they do have arts. And I did that twice, once in middle school and once in high school. The National Scholastic Golden Key award, which is something that is for junior high students and high school students, at least at the time. I won quite a few. I think I have 6 gold keys at home. So it was just something I did, and it's early ripe and early rot. But it was that's just what I did. It was fun. But I think sometimes when you get older and then you start not winning things because that's how it goes, it's a little disappointing, that gifted child syndrome. But it was pretty great at the time. And I got a scholarship to MSU, like I said, and for my freshman and sophomore year. And I don't know if I would have studied studio art had I not gotten that scholarship. It was the push. It wasn't necessarily the money, but it was the push that I needed in my talent, I guess, to say that maybe following art was the right thing to do.
That was kind of the catalyst to pursue it.
It was. I had interest in science and different things. I didn't have a lot of ideas of what I was going to do after college. Just, aside from a few people, I didn't really have a lot of examples of, I guess, things to do out of school. And the place that the small town that I grew up, a lot of times you see teachers and doctors, but you don't see a lot of the other careers, I guess, that are available. So I didn't really have an idea of what I was going to do. And, I was like, well, I guess I'll be an art teacher. But I did a stint as an AmeriCorps Vista, which was really great. And I worked with kids. And I knew that I was just not destined to be a teacher after that at all, which is funny because I was a teacher after I graduated, but for computer skills and for adults. But it was very difficult. I became very emotionally attached to my students and things that were going on, and I just knew that it was not my track. So,
talk about AmeriCorps Vista. What explain that program just in case people aren't aware of it.
It's like National Peace Corps. So it's within the United States, and especially at the time I did it, it was in the mid 90s. So it was in the Clinton years, and it was one of his pet projects. So there were a lot of AmeriCorps Vistas at the time, and you could do anything. You're always at an at-risk or a place that's like a low-income area or an urban area. And you do anything from, working with adults, cleaning up, garbage. There's just a number of different jobs. And what I did was I worked with at-risk youth. So I had K through 5 students at different low-income housing areas that came after school to work on their reading skills. And then I had a group of teenage tutors from the same neighborhoods who had mostly been in trouble with the law or had been skipping school or something. And they became paid teenage tutors for these K through 5 students. And it was a great program. It was hard. It was really hard. And I spent a year doing that. And I knew after that year that working with kids, especially kids like that, I just wouldn't be able to do it for a sustained amount of time. I was just too emotionally involved in their stories. And once kids start to trust you, they tell you everything. And it was definitely difficult.
And where did you do this at? I'm sorry.
I did that in Lansing, Michigan.
Okay. And then how has that informed your adult life? Like, how does it inform you today as an artist or even as just a citizen?
I think I have a lot of empathy for people who are facing difficulties. It's part of the reason why I was very into having my studio at Lakewood United Methodist Church, because they do a lot of work in the community with the unhoused and with the food bank. I think 2 different food banks. And it's just, I think it really opened my eyes to how different things affect, especially kids and learning, just how hungry sometimes kids are, like how something simple like food that I took for granted my whole life because I always had enough affected, how they did in school. and how much the kids that I had depended on the snacks that we had available for the app. They just showed up for the snacks. So it was this weird bribery, like you have to learn how to read to get this snack, but it was a symbiotic relationship. Uh, it really it really changed my life. I felt pretty sheltered before that, and I definitely came out of that program not sheltered anymore.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing, because I think sometimes we go through things, we don't realize like the impact it has on us, you know? So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I had mono, and so I took some time off of school at MSU to recover. And my friend was an AmeriCorps Vista, and at the same place that I ended up being an AmeriCorps Vista, he just suggested it to me, and he thought I'd be quite good at it. And he's actually the same person who taught me how to do web design and web development. Not that there was a lot going on back then. There were like 5 things. And I remember him saying like, well, I guess that's it. But he had maintained their website. They had a web presence for what it was worth. And he developed that website. So I inherited that website to maintain during my year as an AmeriCorps Vista.
How was your experience at Michigan State University? You got your BFA, but how was the actual program? Did you enjoy it?
I actually really enjoyed the program. I know well, actually some of my professors I had are still there. And I thought I got out of it what I put into it. It's a small program, so you're at a huge university, Big Ten, with everything, the football games, the whole 9 yards. But the art program is actually quite small, and I think I really got a lot of personal attention that maybe I wouldn't have other places, which I really enjoyed, and is kind of surprising for a Big Ten school. You just don't expect it, but the art program is actually quite small. And I think the painting program, at least at the time and probably still now, because many of my professors, or at least 2 of my professors, are still there, and they really, really changed my work. They came with me on the whole digital influence, even though they had no idea even how to use their email at the time. Just not really sure what I was doing or about the internet or anything, any of the things that I kept bringing into my classes and showing them. That was my influence. And I make digital images now and project them on my canvases, which is helpful because my canvases are so big. So projecting is something that's, people use for murals all the time. It's super helpful, but I use it to make sure I get my digital sketch on the canvas the way I want. So I use a projector to get it there. And that's something I started doing back in the late 90s when I was finishing up my degree. And they helped me find the tools, or the right tools, that I needed to work on that process that I was developing back then.
So very pivotal in one way, shape, or form in your whole process. I mean, it was something that you built on through the years, right?
I sort of picked up where I left off because I did not paint for 20 years. I got out of school and I became a computer trainer, and I worked at a software company, and I just didn't paint. It wasn't something I did for 20 years until I became so stressed out at the job that I had. I was looking for different things to do, and I quit. And I decided to start painting again because it seemed like it was something I was still drawn to. And I picked up where I had left off in the late 90s. Oddly enough, I started working on sketching on the computer and working in Photoshop and layering digital images and projecting them on the canvas. And that all started at Michigan State.
And what was the catalyst? Why did you pivot from, you were studying art, you got your degree in art, but what made you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in computers and technology?
I spent a semester at New York University at NYU in their graduate program. And this was right after I graduated. And I was at a critique, and it was later at night, and no one had really done their work at the time. And the critique wasn't going very well. And I had one of those moments. I have I have these moments, not a lot, but I've had them several times over my life where I just realized I was not where I wanted to be, that I did not want to graduate and be an art professor and be in these critiques anymore. It was just one of like a strike of lightning. And I left that program and got a job in tech. And, I was back in Michigan. I taught computer skills, but I wasn't really excited about painting at the time anymore. Even though I was using technology as an influence, it wasn't, New York wasn't the place I wanted to be at the time. It was great with all the art, but um, I just I didn't have that passion for painting anymore. I guess I was either burned out or just the program wasn't the right one for me. And I was really, really, really excited about the internet. This was 1999. It was new. I knew how to code already, and some of the things that were happening in technology that were going so fast were really intriguing to me, and I wanted to be part of it.
So even though you didn't paint for essentially 20 years, you had this whole other professional working life. You still considered yourself an artist. Is that correct?
I did. I always, aside from the time that I spent as a computer trainer, and I did teach, I taught Photoshop and Illustrator, and I taught web development. So I taught the creative classes while I was there. But when I got my job in software, I was always working on the creative side of things. I worked in UI, so user interface, and I made icons for the software that we created. Um, I made like a 16 pixel by 16 pixel Mona Lisa for something. I remember I was constantly creating or doing not necessarily graphic design, though I did end up doing a lot of graphic design a little bit later. But I always had a creative position in addition to web development, which is actually quite creative. It's really visual. So I consider myself always a creative or a visual person.
And talk about this folder that lived on your desktop all those years entitled Art Stuff. What's that all about?
I always, throughout every job I've had, and even when I wasn't making art, essentially, I would collect things that I found digitally in my art stuff folder. And I don't do a lot of collecting of real life stuff, but I am a digital hoarder. And I digitally hoarded things for years and years and years for my paintings that I was not making at the time. So when I quit my job in 2019, I actually got to crack into art stuff and start painting again. It was pretty great. My digital hoard worked out.
Was it like delving? I mean, obviously you're saving stuff as you see stuff, but was it like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Is it like diving into a storage unit that you haven't seen in years and finding things that you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot all about that. That's amazing. I want to
It
utilize that.
it was, and it was funny to see all this low resolution stuff that I had collected early on, like circa 19 or not. Yeah, I had some really old stuff, but I think maybe art stuff really got started in 2002. So there was a lot of low resolution weirdness, things that I had thought were cool, and I couldn't really figure out what they were when I delved back into it. So it was a storage unit that went way back in time. It was more like an attic or a basement that you've collected stuff and you've just thrown in. It's time to move. So
Like a time capsule, really, right? I mean,
it
talking, that's a long
yeah,
time.
it is. And I had transferred it from computer to computer to computer to computer on, burning discs. Remember when we did that, burning a CD?
Yes.
And it was it was about a whole CD, I think, for the last CD. And then I transferred it. I don't know when I transferred it to my current set of computers. But it was, when CDs were past tense. It was on an external drive at one point. So it's been a lot of places.
And now we have Pinterest. Well, and that's even kind of passe, but Pinterest is basically the same thing as like collecting digital images and
yeah, except socially. And this was my
right.
secret digital hoard.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's so cool. I think we all have like saved crazy stuff. And I do the same, not probably in the same way that you do, but it's amazing like how many files you just transfer, like, oh, I gotta, and you're going from, like you said, CDs to something else. Like I had a zip drive for a while. Before that, I had a Q drive, and then that didn't pan out. So the zip drive, and then it's just like you keep moving. Yeah. A U-Haul of digital files you move everywhere. So
right. The digital U-Haul.
There you go.
So you talked about being stressed out, and that was kind of the catalyst for you to just say, you know what, I'm done. I need to do something different. I need to make a change in my life. Then the idea is that you were going to get back to your passion of painting.
I thought about it for a long time. I was really stressed out for a number of years for a number of reasons at the job that I had. Wasn't necessarily, I don't want to say necessarily it was a high stress job. It wasn't like I was saving lives or anything like that. It's just, it was a job that had a lot of stress with it and some stressful situations. And I started really thinking about leaving, and I was looking at other jobs and nothing seemed to really resonate with me. It just didn't seem like switching to another job and another set of stresses was what I was after. And I was just thinking, a number of things happened in my life where I was thinking we don't live forever. And I think if you have the chance to follow your passion, maybe you should. And I didn't have responsibilities like, I don't have children, so I didn't have responsibilities of directing a child or supporting them. And I started thinking about how maybe that would release me into being able to work less and just be a part of that less and be able to do something like paint. So when I quit, it was to do both web development contract work, which I do, and I still do, and to see if I still wanted to paint, because I wasn't quite sure. I hadn't painted in 20 years, and I had no idea how to get started in galleries, or I didn't really have an Instagram account, and I didn't know any artists really locally. I didn't live where I knew people who did art anymore, because I lived in Michigan until 2011, and then we moved to Washington, D.C. for 2 years, and then we moved to Colorado in 2013. So I wasn't really, I wasn't sure it was going to work out, the art part at all. And so I had a space at the art gym and realized that I needed a more permanent space where I could paint large, because I was feeling that need to paint large like I did in school and see how that felt. And I got a 10-foot by 10-foot studio, which seemed pretty big at the time, but I was painting at the size that I do now. So you can imagine how funny that was.
You essentially rebooted yourself with your painting. And I mean, you're essentially divorced from it for 20 years. The whole idea of kind of the stage of life you were in kind of came into play. Like, hey, we don't know how much time we have here, right? And if you're going to do it, you better do it while you can, right? Not wait till retirement age, which I think a lot of people end up doing. And then by the time they, reach retirement age, something else pops up and maybe they don't get to it, or maybe they're not able to pursue what they'd like to.
Yeah, that was part of it. My parents were quite a bit older when they had me, and just they're well into their 80s, late 80s now. And my mom kept saying, like, you should do things now while you can still do them. And that included art, because she said you might not want to paint, or you might not want to paint big, or you might not want to do this at all when you retire. And that affected me. like you said, because you never know what's going to happen in the future, or, what kind of painting large, like I do, like I like to, is really physical. And it's hard on your body, I think, to move things around and to paint large and to sustain it. So I wanted to try it out while I still knew I could do it.
That's pretty sage advice from your mom, like telling you, hey, if you're going to do it, you should consider doing it, go for it.
Right. And she's not really a go for it type of person. So it really stuck with me. It's not really like her. So it was really something that affected me. And I thought about for, I think, a year. She knew I was unhappy at my job that I had. And it wasn't that I was unhappy with what I was doing. I was doing web development and project management with the website and digital things and all things that I love. It was just the structure was getting me down.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot, and
Yeah.
I think it's amazing that your mom had this conversation with you, and you perked up and was like, "Wow, this is coming from my mom, who's not necessarily like, of that thought process or that frame of thought," and you went for it. I totally admire that when people make that jump.
It became, yeah, I think going for it, I don't know how good I feel about saying going for it. I was driven to finally quit. I was experiencing a lot of stress, and just really feeling it physically, really, really feeling it physically. There's a mind body connection that just I couldn't ignore at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, essentially killing yourself, over the stress. And I think a lot of people do that. I see it with, other friends of mine that also work in tech. And, it's, the journey for that almighty dollar, and putting up with things that, well, obviously I wouldn't be able to do that. I always tell my wife all the time that, I would last about one day at a regular job. Um, but seriously, I mean, you work all your life, to get to this point, and, stressing yourself out and, putting yourself in a position where it's affecting your health. And I think that's just incredibly smart that you were willing to do that, and willing to carve out a life that you actually wanted. And a lot of people won't do that. They are tethered to that job.
I think it's pretty easy to be tethered to the idea. I mean, obviously, of a regular paycheck. That's you need money to live. So there's that. But if I look back at my software days when I was younger and I was working at the software company, there are a lot of late nights, just long, long days and late nights, and they were fun. They were absolutely some of the best fun that I've had in my whole life, aside from painting and doing art. And I think there's a real parallel there because we were making something, we were making software. I was definitely doing creative work. And everybody had, at least in the early days that I was there was this attitude, the startup attitude. There was like so much energy, and just, I would not give that up for anything. But as you get older sometimes, or with different jobs and different people, it's much different.
Yeah. And you can experience large amounts of stress doing whatever. I mean, I feel stressed during the day and I just do add specialty stuff, but the stress of working with vendors and the stress of working with clients, and, it does. Sometimes it's just so you get home and you're just exhausted, and, and I'm 60 now, and I'm looking at like, why am I busting my ass doing a job that, really isn't what I want to do, but it pays the bills and, gives me some comfort that you rely on. So it's like you said, you get tethered to that paycheck, and I definitely feel that. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun now. I still do web contract work, and I feel like it keeps my mind bendy and in the tech game, where it needs to be for my influences for my art. So I like that. but I also like that it's hourly. So I'm not involved in any of the office politics ever as a vendor. So I can just tap right out of anything that's making anybody else uncomfortable because I am not involved. And it's not that I don't care about the success of the project because I absolutely do as a contractor. But not being involved as a full-timer it has released me to make some of the best web stuff that I've made in my whole career doing web development because I don't feel like there's no office politics about introducing a new idea or having an epiphany, at least not with my clients that I have now. So that's been great. It's been a great change there as well.
Yeah. It sounds like it's been very refreshing as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah, and I still have deadlines and for web development, and that sometimes gets stressful doing that. Or painting for a show can be stressful, but that's actually like some really phenomenally good stress compared to what I was feeling before. So good stress compared to bad stress. There's no comparison.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as a contractor, you're able to kind of pick and choose what you work on. Is that right?
I have I have a number of different clients, and I'm a Jill of all trades when it comes to anything digital, because I worked for about 20 years and I worked at a lot of small places plus and on my own and the software company. So if a client has a problem with anything digital like email or marketing or Google advertising or obviously web development, which is my focus, or graphic design, like even print things. Like those are all things that I've done in the past. So I'm able to be pretty bendy and do a lot of different things for the same clients. I have had the same clients since I quit, and they tend to ask me to do random things, and I'm able to do them. So
Nice. I like how you reference yourself as bendy. I'm going to start using that. You trademark that.
bendy.
Bendy. I'm pretty bendy. Um, let's talk about the work that you've been doing the last few years, or actually going on 4 years now, right?
Mhm.
I pulled this quote off your website. My work is about nature, but it really isn't. Let's talk about what you do as an artist, specifically as a painter, and how you meld the traditional with your technology background.
I do a lot of experimentation digitally. So I really love looking at the next new thing, whatever that is. And lately, basically since I started, that's been AI, um, and a lot of different platforms that have come out. And being about nature, but really isn't. That's more about. I really like painting environments that nobody is ever going to be in or hasn't been in. And I'm influenced by video games. That's the world that I was in for a long time. Software, video games, tech people, tech bros. So I'm influenced by those kind of unreal worlds that you wander around in. That's definitely influenced me. A personal influence, which makes this kind of funny, nature, but not nature. I cannot spend a lot of time in nature because I have such severe allergies. So going outside is not something, and this has been true since I was a kid. I spent a lot of time indoors. So making imaginary natural worlds, it seems funny and on brand, I guess, for me. There's a little bit of humor in there. And how I make my sketches different ways, but I always work on the computer because that's been my world for the last 20 years. That's how I think. I always start thinking on a computer or with a computer, doing web or looking at websites or playing around with software. I've been working with Photoshop for a long time, like basically since it came out. And about 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I saw an article in Art in America about an artist who had started using AI and used a program called Runway ML. And I noticed it was beta and free. So I started working with it as well to see what it was all about. Because AI wasn't something that it wasn't like it was now. 2 years ago, people were just starting to be aware of it. It was something that people were talking about, but not like now. I downloaded Runway ML and started using it. And I bought a few credits because the servers that run AI processes need to be quite a bit larger than what you've got on your personal machine. So you buy credits to run these processes on other servers, and then you get results. And some of them were pretty simple, like making an image bigger, but having more resolution, or making something more focused and taking the blur out of eyes or faces. Just some pretty normal, making a black and white image color. So I goofed around. I made some old family photos, colorized, and found out my grandmother had an affinity for purple dresses. I mean, who knew? Um, and just started playing around with that, and then taking some of the results into Photoshop in working with them, and just bouncing around and I used Dolly when that came out. That was not that long ago. And started working with the text prompts, making images. So you write a text prompt of what you want the image to be and getting the results back. And a lot of times those results are pretty funny or downright terrible. Not something that I would want to use for a sketch of my painting, but they just kind of informed me of a digital process. It was fun to goof around. So it's like sketching without thinking. I do that on the computer. But that's morphed into I have all these pictures that I've taken at the times that I have been out in nature and just on vacation and different things. And I have a collection of things that my friends have sent me. I have a lot of photographer friends, one in particular. So I have that collection. And I have things that I've stolen off of social media from friends. So if you know me and you're friends with me, I've probably stolen your stuff. Sorry. And I trained my own model, which means AI has trained on. So the AI that you think about when you think about AI now, like with Midjourney, you write a text prompt and, I want this image with a bunch of trees and, a person on the side and whatever you want. And then it will spit out a result that is kind of a melding of all the things that it's trained on, which is all the stuff on the internet. So AI has scraped everything off the internet that it can, all the images, to train off of it, like what's a dog, what's a tree, what's green, what's yellow, that kind of thing. And so that's the results that you get, is something that's like from everything up until 2021. And what I built, which Runway ML has made possible, is a smaller version of that. So when I do a text prompt, I'm only getting results from my personal collection that I just described, and things from the folder art stuff that I collected over time. That's definitely in there as well. And what I get is a result that's not, a lot of times it's recognizable to me because the model that I trained is so small. It's only like, I think it's up to 500 or 600 images now. But a lot of times it's recognizable, as I'm like, oh, there's that picture I took in Scotland, and then there's this weird part of Maine over here. And that's what I use to start sketching, is that gives me ideas of these new digital worlds that I can create. And then I pop that into Photoshop and I start layering those results and doing different effects until I get something I want to paint.
And you paint with oil. So what made you probably early on you picked oil, but what makes you paint in oil and not in, let's say, acrylic? What do you like about it?
So I think it would make a lot more sense, I guess, if I painted in acrylic, right? Because that's plastic and it's digital and it's got the bright colors that I typically use. But I did start painting in oil when I was 13. So that's ingrained in me, like everything from the texture to the drying time to the smell to my materials. Like that's painting to me because I started doing that when I was 13, where acrylics just doesn't have that, it's not that meaningful to me like oil painting is. And I also think it's an inside joke to do something so traditional and so associated with art history and apply it to this digital process, this digital influence that I definitely have. It's, obviously no one else is laughing, but I think it's funny. Uh,
No, that makes total sense. I mean, it totally makes sense. But I was just kind of curious because, like you said, acrylic seems like it might be more suited for the style that you're doing. But I love that. I love the fact that you're doing the old fashioned style.
I think it's also funny to reference oil painting in general because when you use oil paints, you're referencing all of art history, right? Just all of it, all the way back, you know, all the male artists that are popular, and I think that's kind of a jab a little bit, I guess, being a female and making these really big, mostly pink, digitally influenced oil paintings. Um, I just think there's some humor and some jabbing in there. It's not something that most people would think about, I guess. That's kind of that's the part of my paintings for artists, maybe if you catch it. Um, but in addition to oil paints being how I think, just like I think digitally, like when I think in painting, it's in oil. Uh, there's that part of it too.
And then one other, I was reading some painter, and he said one of the important things I learned is mixing color on the canvas and not on a palette. Do you mix on the palette and then put it to canvas, or do you mix your art while you're painting?
I get these baby food jars from Amazon and I mix my color in the baby food jars because when you paint large, if you're mixing on a palette, you're not going to have enough paint. You're going to run out of whatever color you're using way before you want to do that. So I mix my colors in there, and then I also mix my colors on the canvas once I have my set of baby food jars all set up the way I want.
And then I was reading you actually like when you started painting, you grabbed some paints from like almost 20 years ago, and you were still able to use that paint, right?
I bought paint in 2003 with the idea I was going to paint my basement, but I never did that at all because I had a creative job and I was just all out of creativity when I got home, as often is the case. And I was working in software and long hours and all that. So I carted these paints around with me from house to house because I lived in a lot of different places from 2003 to 2011. And then I stored them in my parents' basement. And then I sent them to myself when I was visiting my parents, I think in 2018 or something. And then they sat, and then I opened them. Like finally, I opened them when I got to my studio, and I was not expecting them to be still good, and they were absolutely fine. And so were the tubes. I couldn't believe it. So that really told me a lot about the staying power of oil paint, right? Because even in the tubes, like it was still good. It was still paintable. I still have some of them in my studio right now that I am finishing up.
Tenant wants to acknowledge our media sponsor, New Magazine. That's NUE. You can follow both the national and the Denver edition of New Magazine on Instagram. The national edition can be found at new_magazine, and the Denver edition at new_Denver_magazine. And I want to share with you something very exciting. Check out the newly launched New Denver Gallery Guide. Look for the signage that says New Denver Gallery Guide that has a QR code, scan it with your phone, and you have instant access to a comprehensive digital guide to Denver's finest galleries and exhibitions. Find this QR code in your favorite gallery, hotel, or coffee shop as you visit and explore Denver. Thanks for listening.
I'm Ann Morgan, and you're listening to the Tenant Podcast.
I got to see your current show at Next Gallery. I got to say that seeing these in person just like anything, seeing art in person is always better. But I really love the fact that you are using cutting edge technology at the forefront of that. And you've been that, since the beginning of Photoshop and the internet and all your experience there, but also utilizing oil paints, like you said, that's been around forever. Your work would definitely have a different feel if it was acrylic, right? But I love the melding of these two, and I've seen a lot of AI art, but I have not talked to anybody that's utilizing it the way that you're utilizing it. Now, granted, I'm not any kind of expert on AI by any stretch of the imagination, but most of what I see is, I don't know. I don't even know if I consider it art. I imagine they're just plugging in these prompts and they get out something that, a lot of times it's humorous or interesting to a certain extent. Is it something that I would hang on my wall or that I would really covet? No. Your work is a whole different, on this whole other level, which I do. I absolutely love what you're doing. I'm going to pull up an image. I want you to talk a little bit about this particular one. I'm going to share my screen real quick. The name of this piece is
Overwhelming Nothing.
Overwhelming Nothing. Stunning piece. Absolutely love it. In describing your process, talk a little bit specifically about this piece and how you went about it.
This piece is a transition piece, I feel like, from what I did before, and then there's what I did after this piece. That's how important it is. And the reason is because this is the first piece where I really had fully fleshed out my model was trained and I had fleshed out my process. But this painting also went horribly wrong, I guess, at the beginning. It's just, it references the layers that I use in Photoshop. And because if you look at this painting, there's a lot of layers. It was a lot of things before it actually was this final image, which is not, even though I work in Photoshop and I do reference layers, that's typically not what happens with my paintings. I usually make a finished image and paint it on the canvas, and then I will take pictures of that image as I'm working on it and do like a few digital edits to it and reproject and paint a little bit and then finish it up and it's done. And this one, I had an image that I had pulled from my AI model and worked on in Photoshop and projected and painted, and I hated it. And then I reworked it like I do typically, and then reprojected a completely new image on the canvas and painted it in the dark, just to kind of loosen up and turn the lights on. And I hated it. And I kept going back and back and back and back. So it was so involved. So it's many, many different pieces of the AI model and images that I prompted to get out of it. It's a lot of work in Photoshop and reprojecting until I finally ended up with this particular image, which really I covered up a lot of it. I was so kind of disgusted with this whole painting as on the whole, I covered up like the entire left side with red, and I actually did that in the dark because I was projecting this other image on it. And finally I just surrendered and decided it was done and tossed it aside and picked it back up and decided it was one of my favorite paintings I've ever made. It's just a strange process overall, like very emotional. And the other part of this painting is I had shared it with a few people as I was working, so I got some different points of view I normally don't have when I'm painting. So this is pretty reflective of that as well.
What is it like painting in the dark? I think you might be the first person other than people that go out and maybe, paint a nocturne or something like that. But usually I think that's from a reference photo or something they have in their mind. But painting in the dark it seems a little bit, it's different,
It's more like there's a lot of people who do automatic drawing where you're not thinking, you're trying to access a part of your access a part of your mind that you don't normally use and apply that as your drawing, which I don't do. But this painting in the dark is definitely like that for me. I mix my paints that I know I want to have and make sure I know where they are before I turn out the lights and project the image on the canvas. And then I just kind of follow along with what I've already done digitally. But paint is, paint doesn't really follow rules. So when I turn on the lights, it's always a shock. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. And I feel like this gets me out of my head because, as you could probably guess, I'm a pretty measured person. I do work digitally. I'm used to things following rules, logical rules, especially with that code side of my brain. So sometimes I need to be shaken up, and I know this. So I'll paint in the dark, or I will put a lot of color on one side and see what happens. So it's not all digitally based, or it's not all a process that happens on my computer. There's definitely a communication with paint to make it a painting, because this is an object. That's the reason I'm doing it. It just happens to be my influences, the digital and AI and all that good stuff.
And even though you're incorporating all these tools and you look at AI as a tool, it's not the end all be all. It's still a very intuitive process, it sounds like.
I think it has to be. That's how paint works. Just being an artist, sometimes you're called to make marks on a canvas in a certain way, even though I do prepare myself digitally. So yeah, AI and all my digital work and Photoshop and my projector, all that, they're just tools to get to where I'm going, or to almost get to where I'm going, where the paint is what I use to be there.
And what is it about you that keeps you interested in being at the forefront or at the cutting edge of things when a lot of people our age, and we even had this conversation at the gallery the other night, are kind of like set in their ways at this juncture of the game. Like at this period of their lives, they're like, they know what they know, and they're not really interested in learning something else unless they absolutely have to.
I think it's a couple things. I think it's my early influence of being involved in web development. It always changes. You wake up, something's different, something's added, something's changed. It's the same with Google. If anybody's ever worked with any of the Google products, you can wake up and it's a surprise. Something has moved. It's not where you expected it anymore. It's like that with new releases of software. And I was a trainer, so I was just used to things changing. And so that's just how I think. I'm very non-permanent. Like whatever I knew the day before, it might be different the day after. And I enjoy that, actually. It's keeps life interesting, I guess. But I don't really think about it. So I'm one of those people where instead of being scared of new technology or something on my computer, I'm going to mash the buttons until I figure out how it works. And I'm a pretty good button masher, because when I was a trainer, I had to teach those things that I mashed like the next day. So I'll learn things quickly, and I enjoy doing it. That gives me joy. It's one of those things in my life that gives me joy, where I don't know if it's like that for other people quite so much, because a lot of times it's nice to have things that are dependable, but for me, this technology just isn't one of those things. I like to figure out what's new.
It doesn't scare you.
No, like what's the worst that's going to happen? That's the people in my computer classes would be terrified to click on buttons, and it's like there will not be a hole that opens up in as a portal to hell if you click the wrong button. It's, the computer's not going to hurt you. Like, what could possibly happen here if you click the wrong button? Usually you can back out with an undo. And especially now, like you really can't go wrong, especially if you're in software. Like if you're doing something else, like there are some pretty bad things that can happen if you're programming, but not with web development. The worst that's going to happen is something you do isn't going to work. So I feel like it's low risk.
With this particular piece, talk about what kind of prompts you might have used, if you can remember, at the time to help facilitate this painting.
I only used my own personal model for this painting, instead of like Midjourney, which would be a text prompt that would pull from everything, everything on the internet, like we talked about. And for my personal model, I named it landscape. So I have to have that keyword in each one of my text prompts for that model. So I would say I'd like a landscape that has water in the background and a mountain from Maine and some trees from Michigan and a sunset. I'll pull from things that I absolutely know that I have in there to see them reorganized a different way a lot of times. So that's what I did over and over again. And I can see recognizable pieces to some of the images that I have in my models, even still in this painting. But I layered those results in Photoshop to eventually come up with this.
When you're laying out your prompts, if you the next day said the same prompts, it's going to create a completely different image, right? Is it random like that?
It's pretty random unless you're super specific, but
Yeah.
it just something I noticed with both my model and with Midjourney is that you will get different results each time, even with the same text prompts. And even if you're super specific, AI doesn't really recognize things like humans do, especially shapes. It will colors, but I do these pieces, or I have been doing these pieces lately as that I do as prints, where I will, once the painting is done, I will take it back into AI to get some different results. And I've done two different experiments. One is writing a text prompt that is more like poetry or like kind of funky prose, just random. I did a text prompt that said to Midjourney to imagine the back of this painting, and it was this one, I think. Imagine the back of this painting. Imagine lands that are not or could be, something like that, something completely random, and it doesn't really understand how to be creative. So I didn't get the results that you would out of a human, because if you think of the back of a painting, you would start thinking about lots of different things. And Midjourney just kind of recreated. It had this painting as a link, so as a seed, and basically it just recreated the same painting with a few differences. AI often throws in human figures, even if you tell it not to have human figures, even if you're specific. And I think a lot of times it's like, oh, you're a human. You must want a human in this. So you have to be, it doesn't think in a human way, even though people like to think that it's going to take over or it's something human. It learns in a human way, like a brain would work, but it doesn't make jumps or creative jumps at all. And on the flip side, I tried with these paintings as well to describe them right down to the detail, like I would describe them to somebody, to a human, to try to recreate the painting. And there's some shapes that it just doesn't really understand. Like it doesn't really understand a rainbow shape. I told it to Midjourney to make a solid color rainbow, and it just had no clue. It made a sunset, and it just kept making sunsets over and over again. It just had no clue what that possibly could be. So with text prompts, it's always going to be different, and it's not going to be what you expect, even though you think you're being very, very specific.
So can that be frustrating when you're trying to utilize this tool and it's not really spitting out things that you want to see or that you envision?
Maybe at first, but now that I know that's true, I just kind of use it as a riff. I guess it's just this free tool that I can use to kind of spit out some things that I, might want to use and might want to look at. Um, just a funny way to, or a fun way to remix my own photos a lot of times. Just it doesn't get frustrating. It's just something I just kind of look at it objectively. I'm like, oh, here's this thing, here's this thing. I use it to think, I guess, kind of narrow in on what I'm going to paint. Sometimes the text prompts that I write influence me as much as the images I generate. Just it tells me a little bit about what I want to paint.
Because that in itself is generating imagery in your head.
Right. And I have those the 500 or so images that I have in the model that was trained. I have those on my computer. So if I start thinking about a particular thing and I cannot drag it out of AI with my text prompts, I can go find that image and layer it in with the results that I did get from AI in Photoshop. And I work like that all the time, just kind of bouncing back and forth between those apps and sketching, really, but I sketch digitally. So,
and for people that haven't used AI, you can literally type in pretty much anything you want. Is that correct?
you can, within, obvious rules, like a public facing rule, but like in Midjourney, you can actually see what other people are prompting. It's like a discussion board kind of thing where you see what other people are putting in as text prompts, and you see their results. So it's real time, and you can put just basically anything you want, or you can get a link from a website of an image that you'd like to use. So if you wanted to have a picture of yourself and you're like, I want this picture, but I want to be in a Harry Potter type library or something like that. Like a lot of cultural references and images of people definitely work well for text prompts in Midjourney in particular.
How did you come up with the title for that piece?
Overwhelming Nothing.
Yeah.
It was a suggestion from a friend. It reminded him of I think it's a reference to a movie, but that I haven't watched. It struck me as what the painting was actually about. Both like the overwhelming nothingness, I guess, of continuing to go into AI and get things out that maybe are a little bit meaningless, even to me, even with my model that I trained. The images aren't of real places, so there's like this real feeling of nothing sometimes, and the painting overwhelms that feeling of nothing because it's filled with a lot of emotion. And then just overwhelming nothing, overwhelming the blank canvas. Like that painting was a blank canvas. It's definitely not blank now. It's just, a very, I don't know, an obvious reference, I guess. But the title it was suggested to me and it just totally worked. So.
And the title for the show, Once When I Was You, how did that come about?
It came to me because all of the images that I'm using in the model that I trained are from different stages of my life and different stages of when I was storing things in the art stuff folder, and from different people who are not me, things that I stole. So things from my past, I'm not that person anymore. Things that I've stolen, I'm definitely not those people, and I haven't been, but just using those things, seeing through other people's eyes, and just putting it into my digital reference, and pulling things out. It just made sense to me. Like once when that feeling of like, I was you once, and I saw through your eyes, and now I've painted it.
I love that. When you borrow imagery from the internet, or specifically, I guess, like social media, your friends and so forth, do you let them know that you're going to commandeer that particular photo or that image?
I think, well, my real friends know that anything that they send to me or point out to me or that I like on their Facebook or Instagram is probably mine now. And if it's somebody that I'm not super familiar with, just one of those people I run into, or somebody who's not as good a friend, I usually ask or say that I'd like to steal it. So it's a mix of both. But my real friends know I'm taking stuff.
Even by stealing somebody's images or whatever, for your work, when you're done, it's completely different, right? I mean, you
Right.
wouldn't recognize we wouldn't recognize we might see elements of the image that you've used to create your art, but we wouldn't recognize it as like, oh, it's a copy of this.
Nothing is a copy. Everything is absolutely remixed. And that's both an effect of using AI to kind of remix it and then layering it in Photoshop. You have to be pretty, I think maybe only I would be able to recognize different pieces of things. Maybe I've never had somebody say, hey, you totally ripped me off, or, that painting's mine because you used my image. No one has ever said that. It's unrecognizable.
Right. That's what I kind of figured, because like you said, you're taking all these different, and then you're having AI kind of develop something, and then you're using it, and then you're changing it and adding more stuff. I can't even imagine it even being remotely recognizable. But so what's your thoughts on art appropriation?
I think it's complicated. There's a lot of people saying that AI is going to replace artists, right? And I've seen what AI actually creates, and there's no way that it's going to replace artists. It's going to do a lot of other terrible things, but that's not one of them. It doesn't make objects. It doesn't, and plus there's a part of art that it's just never going to be able to understand, because creating art, you have to have a desire. I want to make this thing. It's like being hungry, or having any other kind of desires. You have to want something to make art. And AI is a computer. It's never going to want to do anything. It just does what we tell it to do. It does it in new and fantastic ways and very complicated ways, but essentially it's not going to do that. And the other thing is, people are mad because it trained on everyone's photos, art, everything on the internet. But it is like a human brain in the way it learns. So I think, personally, it doesn't make me feel bad personally that it trained on all of this stuff, because as humans, we also train on all the things that we see. As artists, like there's constantly people ripping off other people, and appropriating things. And that was the whole premise behind postmodernism. Like, nothing is new, everything is regurgitated. So I don't see a problem there. And the whole thing about permission, like, oh, you did not have permission to train on these things. It's like, wait till you hear about the internet, because this has been going on. Like, once you put your image on the internet at all, that image is not yours. The painting is still yours, or the actual work is still yours. And of course you can copyright things, but you're letting a piece of that go just by allowing people to see it. And if it's on the internet, it's a digital file you can download or screenshot or whatever. So I think that's a losing battle. No, and it shouldn't be a battle at all, in my opinion. But I don't think I have a popular opinion.
Right. Do you ever foresee the time where copyright becomes a thing of the past, where everybody's stealing everybody's stuff?
No, I think people, it's human nature to want to own the things that you create. So that's never going to be past tense. But I think trying to control things like, computers scraping the internet for images and learning off of them, I don't think that's a thing. That genie is out of the bottle. That's not something you're going to be able to control. So trying to put it back in the bottle is a losing, that's a battle that you've already lost. Yeah. And that's a battle that's been lost for a long time. Like, just look at the internet. You can take everything you want, images, and have them. I think there's a big difference between taking things and having them because you want to keep them. I do that all the time. I think everyone does that all the time. And between saying that something is yours and then something that you did. And I think, that's where the line is drawn too, and why AI art is you're not able to copyright that, because it isn't yours. It isn't something that you made. You might have created the text prompt, but all those images that it's using to spit whatever that creation is, are not yours, and the machine made it. So you helped. It was a group project, I guess, but I don't think that's something that anyone can own in particular. And I use AI images all the time as tools to get to my paintings, but once they're paintings, it's just not even related to the process work I do. It's really just how I sketch. So it's fun, it's cutting edge or whatever, but it's just a tool.
And then my last question about AI: what keeps you up at night? What scares you about AI?
Well, it's not the AI, it is the humans that are in control of it. So the way AI works is it's going to take shortcuts. So whatever you train it to do, it's going to take shortcuts to get there, no matter what, and it has no empathy. If AI has a physical format like like a robot or whatever, and you train it to say kill people, it's never going to have a moment where it's like, oh, I can't do this because of XYZ. Like, that's just not how it works. It will learn how to do something faster and better, shorter, faster, better, until and it will just keep going. So humans telling it to do something like that and then that happening is what scares me. So not the actual AI.
Yeah, the AI doesn't have a soul, right?
Right.
It's not making these decisions that could potentially be nefarious. That all comes from us. We're like the scourge of the planet. Like, we're the worst animal on the planet.
We are the absolute worst. One of the things that I found funny is Elon Musk, in the book, the biography that came out about him, it mentions that he's he's terrified of AI. And then my whole thing is, if you're that scared of AI, then stop making robots that use it, because that gives them a physical form. Even though there's a lot of things built into the robots that they're creating to make them, fail safes, but still, just that idea of AI that humans might use having a physical form is pretty creepy to me. That'll keep you up.
Yeah, it's coming too.
Yeah.
I spent quite a bit of time looking at your work and on your website, which I love your website, by the way.
Oh, thanks. I made it.
I figured as much. And the other thing that I noticed, in addition to you being an incredible painter and learning about your process, which I really appreciate, is I realized that you're a fantastic writer. And I read your artist statement, which I totally resonated with and I thought was brilliant. Talk about how you feel about artist statements.
Most artists do not enjoy writing their artist statement, and they're a constant work in progress. And I think a lot of times you get caught up in having it in art speak. I don't know if you read that part of my website, but those big fancy words that everybody says in critiques in art school, which that really bothers me, because that's not an artist statement to help people understand your work. That's an artist statement to make you feel a certain way, I guess, as an artist. I'm important too, or my artist statement sounds like everybody else's. And a lot of people now are using Chat GPT to create their artist statements, because it will give you like a lot of nice sounding mishmash that doesn't actually say anything. I don't know how much you've read from Chat GPT, but I think it's really great for doing like the marketing hoo-ha that you often have to do for jobs, or like writing that marketing email or something that they're probably not going to read anyway. But for doing something that's really personal and emotionally driven, like your own art, I don't think that's the answer either, and neither is art speak. So I like to rework my artist statement quite a bit to try to make it something that I would give to, say, my parents, or somebody who wasn't involved in art and didn't have an art degree to kind of understand what my process is and why I made those paintings in the first place. I think that's important.
I like the idea of explaining process over like, what does this all mean? And 9 times out of 10, when I read an artist statement, I want to roll my eyes. It's like, that's complete and total bullshit. Like, you're just making something, like you said, to make it sound, the
Right.
way it should in a gallery or whatever, like this is what people expect to read when they're there.
Assigning meaning after you're done with the work, because I think 9 times out of 10, when you're working, you're kind of like, you're not thinking about what it means at all. You're doing a thing. You're not, it's a physical process. Making art is a physical process, not only like making large art like I do, but any sort of art. And I think there's a part where you're not thinking about what it means and you're just doing whatever it is that you do. And I think assigning meaning to it afterwards is a mistake. And you can totally read through it. You're like, that it doesn't mean that. And plus, you can't hold your art's hand and say what it means to people as they're looking at it. I think a lot of times people are going to bring their own stories and their own narrative and their own feelings to whatever you made. And that's what makes the piece for them or doesn't, is their own story in their head about what it is. So I think something that explains your process in your influence is a lot more meaningful than trying to explain what it means to you, when I think oftentimes it probably doesn't mean that to you at all.
Sometimes it's good to, I know there's bad artist statements, and I know like the art speak where you're an artist really talking to other artists because it's an ego thing. But I think, especially in abstract kind of art, sometimes it's good to have somebody unpack it a little bit, because, the layman a lot of times, and that's why I think a lot of people don't, well, even me at the beginning of this whole journey, I don't understand abstract art or abstract expressionism. I don't really, I mean, it just looks like I should be able to do it, therefore it ain't art. But if you unpack it, sometimes it really helps. But I agree, if you're just writing for other artists or critics, or I don't think that's helpful. But I do think unpacking something sometimes, like, this is what you can see or what you should feel, and then having that experience of spending time with it, and then what's it invoke in you, that's a different level. But
Yeah, I think that's different with, abstract work. Like you said, often it does take a bit of description, for somebody who's not familiar with all of art history to look at it and say why this is important. But meaning is a little bit different than why something is important, or feelings. I'm not quite sure that something that I read, I forget what book I read this in, but it said that the abstract expressionists had no tie with reality because it was post World War II, and reality didn't make any sense anymore in that kind of world. It was essentially that. And I think that more than anything, and this is recent too, that I read that, and how long have I been studying art? Like forever. That's the first time I really thought about it, and maybe why abstract expressionists were working the way that they did is because reality was so harsh and something that you didn't want to look at. Then, why paint it? So it makes something different about the paint, rather than the human experience at the time. So I think something like that, just, where things stand in history, and what they might mean in that context is a lot different than, someone else saying that what their artwork means or what it should mean to the viewer. You can't drill down on what something is going to mean to someone else. You can say what it means to you and how it was to create it, but you can't really tell somebody how to feel about it.
Yeah.
I want my next artist statement to just read, artist statements are bullshit. Look at the art. You think that'll fly?
No, you have to have
Probably
something
not.
more.
Yeah.
But it's something in real language, it really bothers me when people don't write in real language. Like all of a sudden you're writing an artist statement, so you have to talk like something else. It really bugs me. I like to have my things in real language, like I'm texting somebody. I think maybe what you said about my writing, I think in my past, I started writing on diary sites or blogging sites before it was called that in the very early 2000s. And most of my friends are pretty much text only, I would say at this point, because I've moved around or I worked in the software, industry and that's how we communicated. So I think that's really changed my writing skills from something I did in school to some really real language that I need to use all the time. And that's how I communicate is through text.
I want to talk about another piece here. This is another piece that I really enjoyed. Talk about this particular one. We had a little discussion in the gallery the other night, but I want you to kind of talk about this a little bit and what prompts you used for this particular piece.
So the prompts for this particular piece are actually in another piece. I had a picture that I had taken from the internet, and I cut out a tree I had in one of the pictures that I had in um, one of my photos and layered those for another painting. And then I had that image and I layered it with other images that I pulled from AI. But this is more of a kind of a video game process, I guess. I had this idea of, like in cartoons and video games, when the background keeps repeating as you're running or as the characters are running, you're like, oh, I've seen that tree. It just repeats like Bugs Bunny. I had that idea as I was working. This is from another series, the Unnatural series. So I kept doing that for this particular series where I would make a painting and then take photos of it and kind of work with my, things that I pulled from AI. I think I was working with Dolly at the time, and still Runway ML, but I hadn't built my models yet. And then I would just copy and paste, copy and paste, copy and paste, and kind of like my process, I guess, when I was a kid, and pull some of those images for paintings. So this tree like kind of follows you around in that particular series. And this is a close up. It's the final piece of that series. So it's like the most close up of that tree, the most close up of the background, and just different unnatural colors.
And the title of this piece?
It's called 1982, and it's not really referential to the piece itself. It's a reference to what was going on at the time, the politics and a lot of things going on at the time when I painted it. This was spring of 2022. Kind of reminded me of when I was a kid, in second grade and watched the news, just, back when the Berlin Wall was still up and a lot of things like, I that were on my mind as a kid from watching the news, like nuclear war, which sounds pretty heavy for an 8-year-old, but not that directly, but just a lot of the things that I was thinking about at the time reminded me of the early 80s. So I named that piece because it just reminded me of that time. And a lot of the colors, the pinks and the oranges remind me of the clothes I had at that particular time in my life in the early 80s. And, it's not very deep. It's not a very deep reference, but it's just happened to be what I named it.
Talk about your palette in these paintings. It's always a very vibrant, colorful painting.
I really want to reference that screen world that we all live in, especially now after the pandemic, and that I've been living in for, a lot of years with, the blacks are super black, but maybe not super present. And, there's not a lot of grays like that, just that idea of video games and CMYK and the screen world without a lot of grays and a lot of bright colors because there's lights behind the screen. So I try to reference that palette, even though I work in oils, and it's usually not. Oils lend themselves a lot of times to more natural colors. So I have to choose. I'm really particular about my paint colors and tend to stick with the same series of colors that I know have a lot of pigment to get that look that I'm looking for.
And I read that you mix your own neon pink. Is that right?
I did. I did that for quite a few paintings. I haven't done any of that recently, but I ordered oil soluble pigment that's normally used to color soaps. And I found this really neon pink. And I just mixed it with some oil medium and used it as a glaze. And it's got this really not oil painting kind of look to it. It's very dense color. It's not in this particular paint that we're looking at on the screen. But there's one that I painted called Off the Air that uses it quite a bit. And I'm actually looking at it right now. So it's just a fun experiment trying to get, different denser, more neon colors out of oil paint, because you usually don't see that.
One of the things I love about talking with you is you know a lot of stuff that I don't know and I don't understand, because the world that you've lived in the last 20 some odd years of your professional life, this idea that this is all a simulation, you believe that?
Kind of. If you've talked to me long enough, I will always say in a different sim this, because I always feel like there's nothing to prove it's not a simulation. There's a lot of people that kind of believe that, but I just, there's always a chance, and I always feel like there's many different lives that we could be leading, and it might be a different simulation someplace, and uh, we all might be a computer game in somebody else's bigger computer.
It's an interesting concept for sure.
It is, and it makes me sound a little crazy, I guess. But there's nothing to prove that we aren't in a simulation. And there's always those matrix moments that you have, where there's just a hole in what happens, like, some weird random coincidence, or something you swear that you've seen before, or just this seems like a wrinkle in time where something doesn't make sense. And I always think, oh, that's just a simulation. It's a hole in the code, I guess.
Yeah, and there's a lot of places you can go as far as like on the internet that talks about that, and they're kind of fun to follow, and seeing the weird where they say here's a wrinkle, like you said, a wrinkle in the simulation, and they show somebody walking, all of a sudden they're not there no more, or some crazy thing. I know some of that can be manipulated, but it's kind of fun to watch and think about and speculate.
I had, this is, just totally random, but when I was a kid in my bedroom, I had these Holly Hobby, they were paintings. They were like embroidery paintings, something that my mom made, and Holly Hobby was sitting on a chair and she had tea. And when I was a kid, and it must have been a dream, but it seemed very real to me, I said Holly Hobby got up and she poured herself a cup of tea last night. And I was absolutely sure that happened, and nobody could talk me out of it for years, because I was just sure that I had seen it. And those kind of moments I've had over my lifetime. I'm like, wow, that was it was a hole in the simulation.
Right. Isn't it the Beersteed Bears or something like that, where there's a whole group of people that swears it was named one thing and now it's named something else, and I think it's the Monocle and either Monopoly or Mr. Peanut. So those things are just kind of fun and freaky to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, that group think where I forget what it's called, when a group is very sure that something happened a certain way, but then you look back in history, and it just didn't. There's all sorts of mysteries like that. And for someone who doesn't believe in religion, or yeah, I'm an atheist, so I guess maybe that's like something that I believe in, that it might be this might all be a simulation, that there's code behind it all, or some bigger universe where this is all being controlled in a computer or something. It's a fun thing to think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
How long have you been an atheist? Have you always not had this belief in a higher power or God or whatever?
My family was, I don't want to say religious, but I did go to church every Sunday for my whole childhood. And it never stuck. I've read the whole Bible. I made a deal with my dad that I would read the whole Bible in order to get out of church for a number of months. But he had a strong belief that even if I wasn't a believer, because this was just a thing, it just never stuck with me. I never was a believer. I just couldn't do it. But he wanted me to have the cultural references that are in the Bible. So people reference the Bible all the time. So if you haven't read it, or don't have a religious background, you miss a lot of it. I've spent so much time in church, and it's funny because now I go to church to paint, and it never stuck with me. Like some of the stories or the morals or things that you're supposed to get, I guess did, but just not the idea of a higher power controlling us or letting us control ourselves or any of that. Just never stuck.
On your website, you talk about your work is about joy, unapologetic joy. Talk a little bit about that.
There are a few things I think in life that are just fun. And I think art, at least for me, is one of them. Like a lot of times, I guess artists paint or make art about pain or a lot of different experiences in life. And for me, creating things is, especially for myself, and especially after working in a professional way, creating things, making things for myself is absolutely about joy. And I think that reads through my color palette, even though it's supposed to be about the screen, that feeling that it's the one time I get to stop thinking, and just do something. And that's very joyful for me.
You're back in the game. You're showing in galleries. You have some shows that are coming up. Being back into it, how are you going about, or how are you figuring out how to price your art?
I've looked at other artists' work that I feel is on the same level and around the same size, and try to think about that. I try to think about what goes into it. You can't really price art by the hour or anything like that, but I do keep a tally of what I've spent on materials and maybe a little bit about hours, just because I do contract work and that's kind of how I think, as well as comparing it to some other artists' work and trying to figure out, where it's going, who might look at it, and trying to make my prices reasonable for something reasonable for me, but also something that isn't out of range for somebody looking at the piece as well. It's hard. Like pricing my work is one of the harder things that I've done. Like I had no idea where to start when I first made a piece and had to figure out a price. So it's just trying to take a survey of what other people are charging and where I think I am, comparatively, and trying to make the right choice.
As a person that has done what they've done for the last 20 years professionally, how do you feel about social media?
People like to talk about social media and how it's dangerous. And I totally see how it is, with political views and the things that have happened on Facebook and how people can become divided politically. But for art, I think it's been getting on Instagram and both looking at other artists and putting my things on Instagram has been instrumental in getting shows and figuring out how things work since I was out of the game for so long, finding opportunities, meeting people even in the local art scene, and just being aware of galleries and other people's work and what's out there. And I think it's pretty great that art used to be very locked up to artists and crafts and people who felt like they were artists. But now with social media, a lot of people are Instagram artists. They make these great images that are for Instagram. And I think it's an art form in itself to have a good Instagram presence, I think. So I'm very pro social media. It's done a lot for me. Facebook is a different beast, because that's people, and your crazy uncles or relatives that get a hold of you and friend you and comment on everything you put up there. But Instagram is more, it's more public, and it definitely has been one of the places that I've found everything, like the people that I know and the galleries I've been in and the shows I've applied for, and recognition, kind of just knowing maybe I might be on the right path, because people seem to respond to my work. And I started working, like I had my first painting where I'm like, oh, that's a successful painting. And then it was the pandemic. So Instagram was basically the only place I was showing, or the only place anybody was showing for a long time. So it's really important in that sense.
Now, you've gotten shows out of your Instagram presence, people seeing your work?
I found all the shows that I've applied for on Instagram, or most of them, or sites relate that I found because of their Instagram presence that I now go check back on. Yeah.
Nice. And have you sold any work via social media?
I have not sold any work via social media, because you do get those weird DMs that are like, hey, I like your arts. NFTs.
Yeah. All day long. And they're so dumb,
They're really, this is what I fear, because it's so easy to figure out scams because of the way they're written. They're not written well at all. And then I'm like, what if the scammers discover ChatGPT and it makes all their scams, like just spits out like some really great, well-written scams? It's going to be much harder to figure those out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Spend some time.
Somebody could make some serious money by just going to where the scammers are and like teaching them proper English.
Yeah,
like, I'll come to you in Pakistan if you buy me a ticket, and it'll cost you so much money.
Yeah, the Nigerian prince really has taken a turn. Like there's so many scammers, especially art scammers. Yeah, every artist I think has had like a scam, especially recently. And I had a scam. It was someone wrote an email in reply to my site, and I got it, and it was obviously a scam. And my husband was like, well, maybe it's not a scam. I'm like, oh, it's a scam. But whatever, I'm not going to lose anything if I write back. So I wrote back, and it was like the whole thing with I'm moving, like the big story, right? About all this stuff that needed to happen for one of my pieces. And it ended up, so I kept going, and I got a check in the mail, for an amount over what I was charging for my painting. And it was from a lumber company of all things. And the whole scam is you cash the check, and the bank will give you the money. So even if as long as it's a good check, you're responsible for the money that you get, but you will get the money from the bank. And then you send that scammer a cash order for, the amount over that they paid. And then you're responsible for all that money. That's the whole scam. But, obviously I knew that, and then contacted the bank that the check came from that, was associated with the lumber company. It was so random, but it was kind of funny to see it through, like knowing it was a scam and then seeing what happened next. And it was just textbook. Like they had opened the book, and it was like how to scam artists. It did every step. And there it was.
So what did the bank do? They said, no, this is a fraudulent check. And
yeah, they were like, oh, you're the fifth person who has called. So it was just, they had tried to scam a number of people. And you could tell by the emails because it would be a greeting of the wrong time of day, and it wouldn't be a continuation of the conversation that we had the day before. Um, I forgot like what name they used, but I kept saying like, hey, so and so, what about this thing that we talked about yesterday? Like, what about this? What about that? Just to see what would happen. Um, it just it was funny. I think the scammer, they get mad. It's supposed to be a quick buck. So if somebody gives them pushback and obviously it doesn't work, it's a thorn in their side. But if you really wanted to scam people, take the time to like make sure there's not a bunch of weird spaces in your email, and make sure everything makes sense, and make sure it's like the time of day that it's supposed to be, and all this stuff. Uh, I guess paying attention to detail isn't something a scammer would do, but
right.
No, they're lazy. That's why they're
right.
scamming people.
That's why they're
right?
scamming. Yeah, exactly.
In
How
my
lazy,
oh,
how lazy do you have to be to not have the right spaces in your email? Like
right,
that's
being somewhat grammatically correct, using proper punctuation, any of that,
Mhm.
right?
Even in the neighborhood of proper grammar would be a lot better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My sim, all those people get vaporized.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're just gone.
Oof.
Yep.
Every now and then I'll catch a YouTube video of people scamming scammers. They'll play their game and answer the questions and act like they're going to do what they do, and then put some little spin on it, and then the scammer gets all pissed off. And now there's even like hackers that are, hacking into the call centers and saying, "Hey, your name is Priya, and I know who's sitting next to you." And so they have them on film, and they're like, they say the lady's name, and they're like freaking out. So it's like, wow, the good hackers are getting better than the scammers, which is kind of interesting watching the reaction. So
In the software, there's white hat scammers or white hat
yeah,
hackers and black hat hackers.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the white hats.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But it's so easy to get wrapped up in that though. To get like if you're not careful.
Yeah, it's easy, especially if you're trying to make a living off of your work. There's artists, professional artists who definitely it's a surprise that they got scammed. But I think some scammers are very advanced too and actually use correct grammar and different
Yeah.
things and make it very easy to be taken advantage of. And artists are, you really want to believe that people want your work or want a piece of what you're doing in addition to wanting to make a living. You want people to buy that piece of you and be excited about your work. So it's a double scam, like for people who are actually making it work and making it seem like they're very into the work. Like my personal scammer, it was obviously a scam. Like they just picked out a painting to be focused on and never mentioned it again.
So having the knowledge that you have of the internet and web design and doing marketing, any social media tips that you would like to share with other artists?
I wouldn't say I was an expert in social media, just uh, I think something that I've noticed just from what I've done and I guess what I did for the company I worked for before is people respond to images of other people. So if you are, and I tend not to do this enough, but if you are personally standing or with pictures of your work, that's going to get a lot more likes than just your work by itself. Always, no matter who you are. Humans respond to humans. I think maybe that's why AI throws a human in everything that it makes, unless you tell it not to, and even if you do. But people really respond to knowing who you are and a little bit of your face and then your story. It's important to to make a narrative as well as posting pictures of just your work, and finding those right hashtags. It's not the be all end all, but it can be pretty important.
going to pull up one more piece that I want to talk about. And this is also from the show that you currently have at Next. Talk a little bit about this. This is a stunning piece.
Thank you. This is one of my first successful pieces from 2020. When I was working, it was the summer of 2020 when I started working on this. It's based on a picture that I took as I was skiing. Like I pulled over, I took out my phone, and I just grabbed a picture because I liked the trees. And it's one of the first pieces where I just really honed in on my digital process, because I worked with that image. I worked with layers. I pulled a black and white image out of it that I used for the outlines that I projected, and it's the piece. I I had bought a projector before this, and it's really the first piece that I started working with projecting uh, imagery on it and painting in the dark, and then popping on the lights and working on it a little bit more. So it's just this piece out of all the early ones it's really the start of my journey into being influenced. Well, it's the start of my second journey, I guess, of being influenced by the digital and kind of getting a hold on what my process actually was. And this painting, I posted it on social media, and one of my friends and mentors from my software job really, really connected with it and said that this painting really got her. Since it was during the pandemic and she was had cancer at the time, we couldn't see each other, and I had planned on giving her a print of this painting if I got prints done. Um, it's named Josie's painting. And she ended up passing away before I got a chance to see her again. She was living in Colorado after we had met in Michigan. So it's just this piece has a lot of emotions tied to it, as well as being like the first piece that really reflected my digital process and kind of helped me hone in on what that was.
Wow. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Is this a piece that you're currently selling?
Yes, although I would be very sad to see it go because it it's her. I started thinking of it as her painting like much before she was gone. It was December of 2020 when she passed away. It signifies a lot. There's a lot of emotion that no one will ever know from just looking at it. It's my emotions and what I was going through at the time. But I started thinking of this as her painting, and she connected with it so much, and it was just over Facebook that she was able to see it. Since it was during the pandemic, everybody felt so separated. I was painting, I was able to go back to the studio, but obviously, people weren't communicating, and I felt very isolated painting this painting. Uh, and having people reach out on social media or on Facebook, especially her, helped me feel connected again. I think everybody was going through the same thing at that point.
How big a piece is that?
It's 5 foot tall and 4 foot wide.
Okay.
That's typically the size that I work, and it is, for right now, I would love to paint bigger, but that is the size that fits in my vehicle. So it's a size that I'm able to, it feels like it's very large, and obviously people think it's very large, but it's manageable as far as carting it around town and putting it up places.
Fantastic piece. And hearing the story behind it even makes it more incredible. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
So one of my favorite series looking at your stuff is the Burn series. I think why I like it is it's so different than what your other pieces are. Can you talk about that series briefly?
Sure. There were a lot of fires in Colorado in 2020, as you recall, and I was struck by the imagery from the drone imagery of the burn damage, and a lot of the trees. And at the time, the world felt like it was on fire because it was. And I was looking for a way to express how I felt and how that imagery resonated with me. And I've never really drawn since I learned how to paint. And I learned how to paint at an early age. So working with pencil was something that was outside what I would ever do. And I decided to do that. And I had this image that I had pulled from the internet. It was drone footage. It's one of my bigger pieces. And I had the idea I was going to make 2 5-foot by 5-foot paintings to make 1 5-foot by 10-foot painting. And I have that, I still have that. That's hanging in our house. And I projected because I had my projector at the time. So I manipulated the image a little bit, but not like I normally do. And I drew the trees from that drone imagery, the burned trees with graphite and my pencil set. And it didn't quite have the look that I wanted. And I was just doing this on 5-foot by 5-foot. It's like I don't sketch. I just make things huge because that's how I work. So when things fail, they fail really big. But this one happened not to fail. I got this pastel ground. It's golden and it's meant to paint on surface so you can draw on top of it with pastels, but it dries clear. So I use that to paint over the graphite. And I didn't know what was going to happen when I used it. I just pulled it out and just started painting with this giant brush. And it smeared the graphite and made the pencil drawing into a painting. And I was super surprised. I had no idea it was going to work. And I was like, wow, I really like it. And then I took oil paints and I finished it up. And that's that painting. And I used that process for a while. And I've made a few pieces with that process, but it's not how I typically paint. And I feel like it's a little limiting. Like that piece worked and there's a few other pieces that worked. But trying to save that graphite area while I oil paint over it is a little weird. I feel like it makes for a disjointed painting most of the time. So they're not successful all the time. I can't rework it a lot of times like I'd like to. I can't layer like I like to or reference my digital process in that way. So that series just kind of I guess died out. There's not a lot of imagery that really works with that process either. It's really specific to the burnt trees, and because it looks like exactly what it is by using the graphite. So I'm pretty pleased with the pieces that I made, but I feel like I've pushed it as far as I can.
Sure. I was looking at it, and you're right. The world was on fire, and it felt like it was on fire. And I don't know, I saw these and I think it's because, you're looking at all your stuff and then something looks different than the others. And sometimes it's always like the other thing that kind of attracts you. And I think that's what,
right.
But these, I really enjoyed these, looking at these imagery and they're stunning. Yeah.
Thank you. Those pieces really, really struck a lot of my friends, my Michigan friends. For some reason, I don't know why, but nobody really ever talks about those pieces except for this section of my Michigan friends that really enjoy them. And I did a commission for one of those friends while I was in Michigan for a month last year for Art Prize. I painted it in a barn.
Now that we're a couple years away from, all that, it just seems like a dream almost, everything that happened in 2020.
It really does. And I had so many problems like coming back online. That's what it felt like I was booting up again after the pandemic because I didn't really talk to people. And also I had worked from home since 2013, when we moved away from DC to Denver, and I kept my job that was in DC. And so I just worked from home that entire time, minus a bunch of like a few conferences with other people. And I noticed I was starting to get overwhelmed by the presence of people back then when I was working from home so much. I'd go to these conferences with like 500 people and I just, I was absolutely overwhelmed by the energy and just random things like, people would wear cologne and it would like shock me. And I'm like, wow, I'm getting weird. And so when I quit that job, I'm like, oh, I can socialize again. But then it was the pandemic. So I got even weirder, I guess. And it's been very hard to go to art shows and art exhibits, and just not because I'm afraid of getting sick or anything, but just the presence of other people is pretty shocking in my space.
Yeah. Yeah, it did change us, because it was like, going to a concert or, a large gathering right after the pandemic. It was just like, oh, and I still have some like germaphobe kind of stuff that's still like, oh, I got to wash my hands. So.
Yeah, it's really hard to lose that whole pandemic mindset.
Right.
But yeah, it is like a dream. I feel like I finally, figured out how to put on some clothes other than yoga pants and like go out there and talk to people a little bit. But it was tough.
Yeah, and I don't know who's dreaming up the simulations that we're in, but man, they piss me off sometimes.
Yeah, that one was a fail.
Yeah,
that one was a fail.
I don't know.
And
Like, come on.
Also, if they could put out the fires, that would be great.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to mention, talk about, promote that you have coming up in the next year?
I do. I have 2 shows on the books coming up. I have a show at the Center for the Arts in Crested Butte in March. So that opens on March 8th and it goes to the 27th, I believe. And then in December, I don't have a date for an opening, but the month of December in 2024, I have a show at the Art Base, which is in Basalt.
Fantastic. We'll see some new stuff in these shows, I anticipate.
That's going to be all new stuff that I'm working on right now, and a continuation of the series Once When I Was You. So I'm using the same process, and which I will probably develop even more as time goes on, because that happens. But working from AI, working from my model, which I constantly add photos to and different materials, and pulling out my images that I use as sketches. And they're going to be large scale paintings. I'm doing some even larger works, 5 foot by 6 foot and bigger. So it's going to be fun.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, Anne, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening and talking about your process and your work. I thoroughly enjoyed listening to how this all came about and our conversation the other night at Next Gallery. Unfortunately, after this drops, that show will be done, but definitely look out for these other 2 shows that Anne has coming up in March at Crested Butte, and then December in Basalt, Colorado.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. And it was nice to kick back on and doing an artist interview, and I'm glad we did it with you. This has been fantastic.
Great. Thank you. Had a great time.
Good.
Well, I look forward to seeing you down at your studio at some point. And
I'll be there.
Yeah, I try not to bother other people in their studios, but I do want to come down, and obviously I got a chance to kind of see some of the work in progress since Dan's been hanging out. Our friend Dan Drossman's been hanging out in your studio. But yeah, I want to come down and check it out a little bit closer, some of those other pieces that you're working on right now.
Great. Welcome to do so. I have this weird thing where I will talk to you for a second and then I will totally forget you're there and start painting again. So be prepared.
It'll be like being at my house.
You're used to being ignored. It's fine.
Yeah, it's all good. Oh, Anne, thank you so much. Remember to follow Anne on Instagram at EchoPod and check out Anne's stunning work at her website, annemorgan.art. As always, you can find all this information and more in this week's episode notes for the Tenant Podcast. I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.